Picture this. You've spent 7 years building something extraordinary from the ground up. Your fingerprints are on every major decision, every breakthrough, every milestone that transformed a struggling company into an industry powerhouse. Then one day, you walk into the office to find your access card doesn't work, your computer password has been changed, and sitting in your chair is someone who's never worked a day in your field but happens to be married to the right person. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. That someone was me. My name is Elena Morrison, and this is the story of how one phone call erased $1.3 billion worth of work and brought an empire to its knees. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday at Meridian Technologies. I arrived at our Austin headquarters at 6:30 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to tackle the final preparations for what would become the largest infrastructure deal in the company's history. The lobby buzzed with its usual pre-dawn energy, security guards nodding their familiar hellos, early bird engineers already deep in conversation about the day's challenges. I'd been director of strategic partnerships at Meridian for 7 years, and in that time, I'd watched our small cybersecurity firm grow from a 30-person operation struggling to land municipal contracts into a major player securing government and Fortune 500 clients. The transformation hadn't happened by accident. Every relationship I'd cultivated, every late-night negotiation I'd navigated, every seemingly impossible deadline I'd met, had contributed to building something remarkable. The elevator ride to the 14th floor gave me a moment to review my mental checklist. Today's agenda included finalizing contract terms with Pacific Northwest Infrastructure, a consortium representing 6 states' power grid modernization initiative. The deal, worth $1.3 billion over 5 years, would establish Meridian as the definitive leader in critical infrastructure protection. 3 years of relationship building, countless technical demonstrations, and months of legal negotiations had led to this moment. My office overlooked the downtown Austin skyline, and as I settled into my chair, I could see the Texas State Capitol dome catching the early morning light. The symbolism wasn't lost on me after all. This deal would secure power grids from Seattle to San Diego, protecting millions of Americans from cyber threats that most people couldn't even imagine. The partnership with Pacific Northwest Infrastructure had begun almost accidentally. I'd been attending a conference in Portland 3 years earlier when a chance conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, the consortium's chief technology officer, revealed gaps in their cybersecurity framework that perfectly aligned with Meridian's specialized capabilities. What started as a casual discussion over conference room coffee evolved into a strategic relationship that would define both our companies' futures. Building that relationship required understanding not just the technical requirements but the political landscape each state navigated. California's environmental concerns differed significantly from Idaho's budget constraints. Washington's regulatory framework created challenges that Nevada's business-friendly approach simply didn't encounter. Oregon's public transparency requirements demanded documentation strategies that Montana's more streamlined processes could bypass entirely. I'd spent countless hours learning these nuances, traveling between state capitals, building relationships with legislators, regulators, and technical teams. Each state's representatives had different priorities, different concerns, different ways of evaluating risk and opportunity. Success required speaking 6 different languages while maintaining one cohesive vision. The technical complexity added another layer of challenge. Power grid protection isn't simply about installing software and walking away. Modern electrical infrastructure represents a delicate balance of legacy systems that can't be easily replaced, and cutting-edge technology that changes rapidly. Our cybersecurity solutions needed to protect equipment installed decades ago while remaining flexible enough to adapt to innovations that hadn't been invented yet. Meridian's approach differentiated us from larger competitors precisely because we understood this complexity. While companies like Secure Grid Solutions and Tech Fortress offered standardized packages, we developed customized solutions that addressed each region's specific vulnerabilities. The Pacific Northwest faced unique threats from both foreign state actors and domestic extremist groups, requiring protection strategies that acknowledged these realities without creating unnecessary operational burdens. My role extended beyond simple relationship management. I'd become the primary liaison between Meridian's technical teams and Pacific Northwest Infrastructure's diverse stakeholder groups. This meant translating complex cybersecurity concepts into language that state legislators could understand, while simultaneously ensuring that our engineers received the detailed technical specifications they needed to develop effective solutions. The process involved dozens of site visits across 6 states, each requiring careful coordination between multiple agencies, contractors, and oversight bodies. I'd stood in control rooms monitoring hydroelectric dams in Washington, toured solar installations across Nevada's desert landscape, and reviewed wind farm operations along Oregon's coast. Every location presented unique security challenges that our solutions needed to address without interfering with normal operations. Building credibility within each state's bureaucratic structure required patience and persistence. Government procurement processes move deliberately, with good reason. Mistakes in critical infrastructure protection can have catastrophic consequences. I'd learned to navigate lengthy approval processes, extensive documentation requirements, and multiple review stages without losing momentum or stakeholder confidence. The financial negotiations proved equally complex. Each state contributed different amounts to the consortium budget based on population, infrastructure scale, and economic capacity. These contributions needed to align with protection levels that reflected actual threat exposure rather than simple mathematical formulas. Montana's rural power grid faced different risks than California's dense urban networks, but both deserved comprehensive protection within their budgetary constraints. Meridian's pricing structure reflected these realities. Rather than offering identical services at uniform rates, we developed tiered protection levels that maximized security within each state's financial capabilities. This approach required extensive analysis of threat landscapes, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and budget limitations, work that I'd coordinated between our technical teams, financial analysts, and state representatives over many months. The legal framework presented its own challenges. 6 states meant 6 different legal systems, 6 different contract law interpretations, and 6 different regulatory environments. Our legal team, led by Jennifer Walsh, had crafted an agreement structure that satisfied each state's requirements while maintaining operational consistency across the entire region. The contract documents filled 3 filing cabinets and represented hundreds of hours of careful legal analysis. Beyond the primary contract, we'd developed supplementary agreements covering everything from personnel security clearances to equipment maintenance protocols. Each state maintained different standards for background checks, different requirements for ongoing training, and different expectations for emergency response procedures. Our agreements needed to accommodate this diversity while ensuring that security measures remained consistent and effective. The timeline for implementation stretched across 5 years, with specific milestones tied to funding releases and performance metrics. Year 1 focused on assessment and initial deployment in the most vulnerable locations. Years 2 and 3 expanded coverage to secondary priority sites while upgrading protection at primary locations. Years 4 and 5 emphasized optimization, advanced threat response capabilities, and integration with emerging technologies. This phased approach allowed each state to integrate our systems gradually without overwhelming their existing operations. It also provided opportunities to refine our methods based on real-world experience before expanding to additional locations. The Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Consortium had insisted on this measured implementation schedule, recognizing that cybersecurity improvements needed to enhance rather than disrupt essential services. My relationship with Dr. Chen had evolved from professional courtesy to genuine partnership throughout this process. She understood both the technical requirements and political sensitivities involved in protecting critical infrastructure across multiple jurisdictions. Her support had proven invaluable during challenging moments when state representatives questioned cost, timelines, or technical approaches. The trust we'd built extended beyond simple contract negotiations. Dr. Chen had invited me to participate in industry conferences, introduced me to other potential clients, and provided references that opened doors to additional opportunities. Our partnership had become a model for how cybersecurity companies could work effectively with large government consortiums. As I prepared for the final contract signing, scheduled for later that week, I reflected on how this deal would transform Meridian's future. The revenue would fund expansion into new markets, development of next-generation technologies, and hiring of additional specialists. More importantly, success with Pacific Northwest infrastructure would establish our reputation as the preferred partner for large-scale government cybersecurity initiatives. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting longer shadows across my office floor as I reviewed the final contract documents one more time. Every clause had been carefully negotiated, every technical specification had been thoroughly validated, and every implementation timeline had been coordinated with all stakeholders. 3 years of work would culminate in a partnership that would protect millions of Americans while establishing Meridian as an industry leader. I had no way of knowing that within hours, everything would change. The relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned, and the future I'd planned would all become irrelevant. But that morning, surrounded by contract documents and implementation plans, I felt the quiet satisfaction of work well done and opportunities well earned. The phone on my desk remained silent. My computer showed no unusual emails. My calendar displayed a normal day of meetings and follow-up calls. Nothing indicated that my 7 years at Meridian were about to end, or that the $1.3 billion partnership I'd spent 3 years building was about to disappear with a single phone call. The first sign something was wrong came at 8:47 a.m., when my assistant, Marcus Rivera, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. Marcus had worked with me for 4 years, handling everything from travel arrangements to preliminary client communications. He'd developed an intuitive sense for reading situations, and his face now carried a mixture of confusion and concern that immediately put me on alert. "Elena, there's something strange happening," he said, closing the door behind him. "I just tried to access the Pacific Northwest files to prepare your presentation materials for Thursday's final review, but the system says I don't have authorization anymore." I frowned, minimizing the email I'd been composing to Dr. Chen about minor contract language adjustments. "That's odd. Probably just a server glitch. Try logging out and back in." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I did. 3 times. Then I called it, and they said my access permissions were revoked this morning by executive order. Marcus paused, his voice dropping slightly. "They also said your permissions were changed too, but they wouldn't tell me what that means." A cold sensation began forming in my stomach. In 7 years at Meridian, I'd never experienced access restrictions on projects I'd initiated and managed. I turned to my computer and navigated to the Pacific Northwest Infrastructure folder. Our central repository containing 3 years of correspondence, technical specifications, contract drafts, financial projections, and implementation timelines. Access denied. The message appeared in stark red letters against a white background, as if the computer itself was delivering bad news. I tried several other project folders, including smaller clients I'd been managing. Same result. My access had been systematically removed from every strategic partnership file in our system. "Marcus, go to the 15th floor and find Janet Holbrook in Human Resources. Don't call, go in person. Ask her if there are any policy changes affecting departmental access protocols. Don't mention the specific issue, just general inquiry about recent system updates." After Marcus left, I attempted to reach Paul Garrett, our Chief Technology Officer, who oversaw all internal system permissions. His direct line went straight to voicemail, unusual for someone who typically answered calls within 2 rings. I tried texting him, but received no immediate response. The intercom on my desk buzzed with an incoming call from the main reception. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Blackwood would like to see you in his office immediately." Richard Blackwood, Meridian's CEO, rarely summoned employees for immediate meetings. Our interactions typically followed scheduled patterns: monthly departmental reviews, quarterly strategic planning sessions, and annual performance evaluations. Unscheduled requests usually meant either extraordinary opportunities or serious problems. The executive suite occupied the top floor of our building, accessible only through a separate elevator that required special keycard authorization. As I swiped my card, I wondered if the access issues were part of some larger system maintenance that Blackwood wanted to discuss. Perhaps the Pacific Northwest deal had attracted attention from potential investors or acquisition targets, requiring enhanced security protocols. The elevator doors opened to reveal an environment I'd visited dozens of times, but suddenly felt unfamiliar. Blackwood's assistant, Patricia Summers, looked up from her desk with an expression that mirrored Marcus's earlier concern. She'd been with the company longer than anyone except Blackwood himself, and her typically warm demeanor seemed strained. "Go right in, Elena. Mr. Blackwood is waiting." The corner office provided panoramic views of Austin's skyline, with floor-to-ceiling windows that normally created an atmosphere of openness and possibility. Today, however, the space felt charged with an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't immediately identify. Blackwood stood behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Seated in one of the leather chairs facing the desk was someone I'd never seen before. A man in his early 30s wearing an expensive suit that somehow managed to look both perfectly tailored and slightly uncomfortable on his frame. His presence immediately struck me as significant, though I couldn't determine why. "Elena, please sit down. I'd like you to meet Derek Castellano." The name meant nothing to me, but Castellano stood and extended his hand with the kind of confident smile that suggested he was accustomed to making positive first impressions. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, and his eye contact felt genuine, though something about his overall presence seemed rehearsed. "Derek will be joining our team as the new Director of Strategic Partnerships, effective immediately," Blackwood continued, settling into his chair. "He brings extensive experience from Tech Fortress Industries, where he managed several high-profile government contracts." The words hit me like ice water. Director of Strategic Partnerships was my title, my role, my identity within the company. I'd built that position from the ground up, expanding it from managing small municipal contracts to overseeing billion-dollar infrastructure deals. The implication was unmistakable, but I needed clarification. "I'm sorry, Richard, but I'm not understanding. Are you creating a duplicate position? Expanding the department?" "No, Elena. Derek is replacing you in that role. We're restructuring the department to better align with our long-term strategic objectives." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality. I was being fired, removed from the position I'd created, stripped of the projects I'd developed, and replaced by someone whose primary qualification seemed to be previous employment with one of our major competitors. "I see." I kept my voice steady, though my mind was racing through implications and possibilities. "May I ask what prompted this decision? My performance reviews have been consistently excellent, and the Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal represents the largest contract in company history." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "This decision reflects our need for fresh perspectives and new approaches to strategic partnerships. Derek's background with Tech Fortress provides insights into market dynamics that will benefit our future growth." The explanation felt hollow, rehearsed, inadequate for the magnitude of what was happening. Tech Fortress Industries was indeed a major player in cybersecurity, but their approach differed fundamentally from ours. They specialized in standardized solutions and volume contracts, while Meridian's success came from customized approaches and relationship-based partnerships. "What about the Pacific Northwest infrastructure contract?" "I've been the primary relationship manager for 3 years. Dr. Chen and her team expect to work with me through implementation." Derek spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent. "I've already begun reviewing that project file. Tech Fortress actually submitted a competing proposal for that same contract, so I'm familiar with the technical requirements and stakeholder dynamics. The transition should be seamless." His casual dismissal of 3 years of relationship building revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how strategic partnerships actually functioned. Technical requirements represented only one component of complex government contracts. Trust, communication patterns, cultural understanding, and personal relationships often determine success or failure more than technical capabilities. "I understand your concerns," Blackwood interjected, "but we're confident this transition will benefit all parties involved. Derek's experience with large-scale implementations will bring valuable perspective to the Pacific Northwest project." The meeting's predetermined nature became increasingly apparent. This wasn't a discussion or consultation. It was a notification. Decisions had been made, plans had been finalized, and my presence served merely to formalize the transition. The access restrictions I'd discovered earlier suddenly made perfect sense as preparation for this moment. "When does this change take effect?" I asked. "Immediately. Derek will assume all your current responsibilities today. Patricia has prepared your separation documentation, including severance details and benefit continuation information." Severance. The word confirmed what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. This wasn't a transfer or reassignment. It was termination. 7 years of building relationships, developing expertise, and creating value for the company would end with a severance package and benefit continuation documentation. "I'd like to understand the reasoning behind this decision. My track record speaks for itself, and the Pacific Northwest deal validates our relationship-based approach to strategic partnerships. What specific performance issues or strategic changes drove this decision?" Blackwood's pause suggested he was choosing his words carefully. This decision reflects our board's assessment of departmental needs and future strategic directions. We appreciate your contributions to Meridian's growth, and we're committed to ensuring a smooth transition. Board assessment. The phrase introduced a new element to consider. Meridian's board included several external investors who'd joined during our rapid growth phase. Their priorities might differ from operational realities, particularly if they were comparing our approach to industry standards set by larger competitors like Tech Fortress. Derek cleared his throat softly. I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for the work you've done here. The Pacific Northwest infrastructure relationship is impressive, and I hope to build on the foundation you've established. His attempt at diplomacy felt patronizing rather than respectful. Building on foundations required understanding how those foundations were constructed, something that couldn't be achieved through file reviews and technical assessments. The relationships I'd developed with Dr. Chen and state representatives across 6 jurisdictions reflected years of patient cultivation, consistent follow-through, and demonstrated expertise. I appreciate that sentiment, I replied, but I think you'll find that strategic partnerships in government cybersecurity depend heavily on personal trust and long-term relationship dynamics. Dr. Chen specifically chose to work with Meridian because of our collaborative approach and proven reliability. Changing relationship managers at this stage introduces unnecessary risk to contract finalization. We understand your concerns, Blackwood said, but we're confident in Derek's ability to maintain continuity while bringing fresh perspectives to the relationship. The repeated emphasis on fresh perspectives suggested underlying dissatisfaction with my approach, though no one had expressed such concerns during my regular performance reviews. If anything, the Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal had been celebrated as validation of our strategic direction and competitive positioning. What about my other clients? The Portland Municipal Authority contract, the Nevada State University project, the Arizona Department of Transportation cybersecurity upgrade. Derek will assume responsibility for all strategic partnership accounts, Blackwood replied. We'll ensure proper transition communications with each client to maintain service continuity. The scope of the change became clearer. This wasn't simply replacing me in one role, it was transferring my entire professional network, all my client relationships, and every project I'd developed to someone who'd never interacted with these organizations before. I'd like to request a formal review of this decision. Given my track record and the timing relative to our largest contract signing, I believe there may be factors that haven't been fully considered. This decision is final, Alana. Patricia has your separation documentation ready, and Marcus will help coordinate the transfer of your project files to Derek. The finality in Blackwood's voice eliminated any possibility of appeal or reconsideration. Whatever factors had driven this decision, they weren't subject to debate or modification. My 7 years at Meridian would end with a separation package and file transfer coordination. Derek stood up, extending his hand again. I hope there are no hard feelings. I'm genuinely looking forward to building on your excellent work. I stood as well but didn't take his hand. There are definitely hard feelings, Derek, but they're not directed at you personally. You're walking into a situation that's been misrepresented to you, and you'll discover that fairly quickly. The meeting ended with Blackwood's brief thanks for my contributions and Patricia Summers' gentle direction toward the separation documentation. As I left the executive suite, the magnitude of what had just occurred began settling in. 7 years of career development, 3 years of work on the industry's largest cybersecurity contract, and dozens of carefully cultivated professional relationships had been transferred to someone I'd met 15 minutes earlier. But as the elevator descended toward my former office, one thought crystallized with unusual clarity: they had no idea what they'd just done to themselves. The elevator ride back to my office felt like descending into a different reality. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been reviewing final contract details for the largest deal in company history. Now I was effectively unemployed, stripped of my professional identity, and watching 7 years of work transferred to a stranger. Marcus was waiting in my office with Janet Holbrook from Human Resources. Janet's presence confirmed that the access restrictions weren't technical glitches, they were deliberate preparations for my removal. Her expression carried the careful neutrality that HR professionals develop when delivering difficult news. Elena, I'm sorry this had to happen this way, Janet said. I've brought your separation documentation and personal belongings collection procedures. We'll need to complete the transition process today. The efficiency was remarkable. Within hours, Meridian's leadership had orchestrated my removal, arranged my replacement, and prepared all necessary documentation. The planning required for such coordination suggested this decision hadn't been spontaneous or recent. "Marcus, I need you to understand that your job isn't affected by this change," I said. "Derek Castellano will need an assistant who understands our client relationships and project timelines. Your knowledge will be valuable during the transition." Marcus looked uncomfortable, glancing between Janet and me. "Actually, they've already reassigned me to support the finance department. Mr. Castellano is bringing his own assistant from Tech Fortress." Another surprise, Derek wasn't just replacing me, he was importing his entire support structure, eliminating anyone who might provide institutional memory or alternative perspectives on client relationships. The thoroughness suggested either exceptional preparation or concerning paranoia about existing staff loyalties. Janet handed me a thick envelope containing separation agreements, benefit continuation forms, and legal documents requiring signature. The severance package was generous, 6 months' salary plus extended health insurance coverage, but the accompanying non-disclosure and non-compete clauses were remarkably restrictive. "I'll need time to review these documents with legal counsel before signing anything," I said. "Of course, you have 72 hours to return signed documents if you want to accept the severance terms. After that, the offer expires and you'll receive only the minimum legally required compensation." The implied pressure was clear: sign quickly and receive generous compensation or forfeit significant financial benefits by seeking legal review. For most employees, the choice would be obvious, but something about the entire situation felt orchestrated in ways that extended beyond normal corporate restructuring. After Janet left, I began the surreal process of packing personal items from an office I'd occupied for 7 years, the accumulated artifacts of a successful career: client appreciation plaques, conference presentation awards, photographs from industry events, suddenly seemed like relics from someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Sarah Chen. "Looking forward to Thursday's final review meeting. Any last-minute items we should address beforehand." The irony was devastating. Dr. Chen had no idea that the person she'd worked with for 3 years, trusted with her organization's most critical cybersecurity decisions, and developed a genuine professional partnership, had just been eliminated from the project. Derek Castellano would walk into Thursday's meeting as if nothing had changed, probably believing his Tech Fortress experience qualified him to seamlessly continue relationships that had taken years to build. I stared at Dr. Chen's message for several minutes before responding. "There may be some personnel changes on our team. I'll call you later today to discuss." The response felt inadequate, but I needed time to understand my options before potentially damaging relationships that extended beyond my employment with Meridian. Dr. Chen trusted me personally, not just professionally, and that trust represented something valuable that shouldn't be destroyed by corporate politics. As I continued packing, Marcus returned with an update that crystallized my growing suspicions about Derek Castellano's background and qualifications. "I did some research on your replacement," he said quietly, closing the office door. Derek Castellano worked at Tech Fortress for 18 months as a business development associate, not a director-level position. Before that, he spent 2 years at a marketing firm in Boston. His LinkedIn profile shows no previous experience with government contracts or cybersecurity. The revelation was startling. Blackwood had described Derek as bringing extensive experience with high-profile government contracts, but Marcus's research suggested minimal relevant experience. Either Blackwood had been misinformed about Derek's background, or he'd deliberately misrepresented it during our meeting. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Derek's LinkedIn profile shows he's married to someone named Isabella Blackwood Castellano, same last name as our CEO." The final piece clicked into place. Derek Castellano wasn't just my replacement, he was Richard Blackwood's son-in-law. The strategic partnership director position, requiring years of relationship building and specialized expertise, had been given to a family member whose qualifications consisted primarily of marriage to the CEO's daughter. The nepotism was blatant, but more troubling was the deception. If Blackwood had simply announced his intention to bring family into the business, that would have been his prerogative as CEO. Instead, he'd constructed an elaborate justification based on Derek's supposed experience and fresh perspectives, making me complicit in my own replacement through a meeting that was essentially theater. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me, but it has to stay completely confidential. Can you access Derek's personnel file, or any documentation about his hiring process?" "I don't have direct access, but I might be able to ask my girlfriend in HR about general hiring procedures without mentioning specific names. Be very careful. Don't do anything that could jeopardize your position here. Just see if you can learn whether Derek went through normal hiring channels or if his appointment bypassed standard procedures. After Marcus left, I sat alone in my partially packed office, processing the full scope of what had occurred. My removal from Meridian wasn't about performance, strategic direction, or fresh perspectives. It was about creating a high-profile position for the CEO's son-in-law, regardless of his qualifications or the potential impact on existing client relationships. The Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal represented more than just a large contract. It was validation of our entire approach to strategic partnerships. Dr. Chen and her consortium had chosen Meridian over larger competitors specifically because of our relationship-based methodology and proven track record. Replacing me with an inexperienced family member jeopardized not just the immediate contract but Meridian's reputation within the government cybersecurity market. I pulled out my personal phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Dr. Chen's direct number. The conversation I was about to have would permanently alter my relationship with Meridian, but it would also honor the professional obligations I felt toward someone who'd trusted me with her organization's critical security needs. Dr. Chen answered on the second ring. Elena. Perfect timing. I was just reviewing tomorrow's agenda items with our technical team. Sarah, I need to discuss some important changes affecting our project. Do you have a few minutes for a confidential conversation? Her tone shifted immediately. Of course. What's happening? I'm no longer with Meridian Technologies as of today. The company has appointed a new director of strategic partnerships who will assume responsibility for your account. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Dr. Chen finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of surprise and concern. I'm sorry, but I need clarification. Are you saying you've left the company voluntarily, or were you terminated? I was terminated this morning and replaced by Derek Castellano, who previously worked at Tech Fortress Industries. The transition is effective immediately. Tech Fortress was one of our rejected bidders. Their proposal didn't meet our technical requirements, and their approach was completely incompatible with our operational needs. Why would Meridian replace you with someone from a company we specifically chose not to work with? Her question highlighted the fundamental flaw in Blackwood's decision. Derek's Tech Fortress background wasn't an asset for managing the Pacific Northwest relationship, it was a liability. Dr. Nichen's consortium had evaluated and rejected Tech Fortress's standardized approach in favor of Meridian's customized solutions. Sarah, I want to be completely transparent with you about something that affects your decision-making. Derek Castellano is Richard Blackwood's son-in-law. His appointment appears to be based on family connections rather than relevant experience or qualifications. The second silence lasted even longer. When Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Are you telling me that Meridian removed the director who developed our entire partnership and replaced her with the CEO's son-in-law who has no relevant experience and comes from a company whose approach we rejected? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Alana, this conversation is extremely concerning from multiple perspectives. The Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Consortium selected Meridian based largely on our confidence in your team's expertise and approach. Replacing you with an unqualified family member 3 days before our final contract signing suggests either catastrophic mismanagement or deliberate deception. Her response validated my decision to make the call. Dr. Chen understood the implications immediately, not just for contract finalization but for the entire long-term partnership. What are your recommendations for how we should proceed? She asked. The question carried enormous weight. My answer would determine whether the $1.3 billion Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal proceeded as planned, underwent significant modifications, or collapsed entirely. It would also define my professional integrity and future reputation within the industry. Sarah, I believe you should request a detailed briefing from Derek Castellano about his experience with government cybersecurity contracts, his understanding of your specific technical requirements, and his plan for managing the implementation across 6 different state jurisdictions. His responses will help you evaluate whether Meridian can still deliver the partnership you need. And if his responses demonstrate that he's not qualified to manage our account, then you'll need to decide whether Meridian's technical capabilities are sufficient to overcome concerns about relationship management, or whether you should consider alternative partners who can provide both technical excellence and experienced leadership. Dr. Chen was quiet for almost a minute before responding. Elena, I appreciate your professionalism in this conversation. You could have recommended that we immediately terminate our relationship with Meridian, but instead you've given us information we need to make informed decisions. That level of integrity reinforces my confidence in your judgment. I built my career on honest relationships, Sarah. That doesn't change because my employment status has changed. I understand. Let me discuss this situation with our technical team and state representatives. We'll definitely be requesting that detailed briefing from Mr. Castellano, and we'll be evaluating our options very carefully. After ending the call, I realized I'd just activated a process that would expose Derek Castellano's inexperience to the most important client in company history. Dr. Chen wouldn't accept superficial explanations or rely on Richard Blackwood's assurances about fresh perspectives. She would demand specific evidence of relevant experience and detailed understanding of complex technical requirements. Derek had walked into a position requiring expertise he didn't possess, managing relationships he didn't understand, overseeing projects he'd never encountered before. Within days, possibly hours, his limitations would become apparent to clients who had specifically chosen Meridian based on capabilities he couldn't demonstrate. The phone call had been truthful, professional, and necessary for protecting Dr. Chen's interests, but it had also initiated a chain of events that would rapidly reveal the consequences of replacing experienced professionals with unqualified family members. I returned to packing my personal belongings, but now the process felt different. Instead of clearing out the remnants of a career that had been unfairly terminated, I was preparing to watch an empire built on relationships and trust collapse under the weight of nepotism and poor judgment. The separation documents Janet had provided remained unsigned on my desk. I had 72 hours to decide whether to accept generous severance in exchange for silence, or forfeit financial benefits while retaining the freedom to speak honestly about what I'd witnessed. As I looked out my office window at the Austin skyline one final time, the decision felt surprisingly easy. 24 hours after my termination, I received a call that would have been routine under normal circumstances, but now felt like watching a disaster unfold in real time. Derek Castellano was calling from my former office, and his voice carried the strained confidence of someone trying to project authority while drowning in unfamiliar territory. Elena, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I'm having some difficulty accessing certain client files and understanding the background on a few projects. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to provide some context. The irony was remarkable. The man who'd been positioned as bringing fresh perspectives and extensive experience was calling his predecessor for help within his first day on the job. But what made the situation truly surreal was that Derek seemed oblivious to how his request undermined everything Richard Blackwood had said about his qualifications. Derek, I appreciate that transitions can be challenging, but I'm no longer employed by Meridian. Any questions about client relationships or project details should be directed to Richard Blackwood or other current staff members. I understand your position, but some of these files reference conversations and agreements that aren't fully documented. The Pacific Northwest Infrastructure folder, for example, contains technical specifications and implementation timelines, but I can't find the relationship history or decision-making rationale that led to our current proposal structure. His admission revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how strategic partnerships functioned. The documented files represented only the visible portion of 3 years of relationship building. The real foundation, trust, communication patterns, stakeholder preferences, political sensitivities, existed in experience and institutional memory that couldn't be transferred through file access. Derek, that information exists in the form of professional relationships and contextual understanding developed over time. Dr. Sarah Chen and her team chose Meridian based on our collaborative approach and demonstrated expertise. You'll need to rebuild that foundation through direct engagement with their technical staff and state representatives. Right, but I was hoping you might provide some background about their specific concerns or preferences. Dr. Chen mentioned wanting to schedule a detailed briefing about my experience and approach, and I want to make sure I address the issues that matter most to them. The conversation Dr. Chen had mentioned was already in motion. Derek's request for background information revealed that he understood the briefing represented more than routine introduction. It was an evaluation that would determine whether the partnership could continue. My advice is to be completely honest about your background and let your experience speak for itself. Dr. Chen values transparency and direct communication above all else. After ending the call, I reflected on Derek's situation with a mixture of professional sympathy and personal satisfaction. He'd been placed in an impossible position through no fault of his own, asked to manage relationships he couldn't possibly understand and oversee projects requiring expertise he didn't possess. But his appointment had also eliminated my career and jeopardized client relationships I'd spent years developing. Later that afternoon, Marcus texted me with an update that confirmed my growing suspicions about the timeline and coordination behind my removal. Found out Derek's hiring paperwork was processed 3 weeks ago. His start date was always planned for this week, which means your termination was decided before the Pacific Northwest contract was finalized. Also, Isabella Blackwood Castellano works in the marketing department here. They kept the family connection quiet, but several people knew about it. The revelation added another layer of deception to an already troubling situation. Richard Blackwood hadn't made an impulsive decision based on fresh perspectives or strategic reassessment. He'd planned my removal weeks in advance, negotiating my termination while allowing me to continue finalizing a contract I would never see implemented. The timing also explained why Derek seemed unprepared for the complexities he was inheriting. Despite having 3 weeks to prepare, he'd apparently spent that time completing administrative requirements rather than learning about the clients and projects he would manage. Either he'd been overconfident about his ability to adapt quickly, or no one had adequately explained the sophisticated relationship management his new role required. That evening, I made a decision that would escalate the consequences of Meridian's poor judgment beyond anything I'd initially intended. I called James Mitchell, a former colleague who now worked as Pacific Coast Director for Quantum Defense Systems, one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the country. James and I had maintained professional contact since his departure from Meridian 2 years earlier. His new position involved identifying strategic opportunities for Quantum's government contracts division, and he'd occasionally reached out about potential collaboration or referral opportunities. "Elena, great to hear from you. How are things in Austin?" "Actually, James, I'm no longer with Meridian as of yesterday. The company decided to restructure the Strategic Partnerships Department." "Seriously? That's insane. You built that department from nothing into one of the most successful client relationship operations in the industry. What happened?" I provided James with a carefully neutral summary of recent events, focusing on factual changes without editorial commentary about motives or decision-making quality. Professional relationships required maintaining credibility through accurate information rather than emotional reactions, so they replaced you with Richard Blackwood's son-in-law, who has 18 months of business development experience and no background in government cybersecurity. "That's correct." James was quiet for several seconds before responding. "Elena, you know I've been tracking the Pacific Northwest infrastructure procurement process for the past year. Quantum submitted a proposal, but we withdrew when it became clear that the consortium preferred Meridian's relationship-based approach. Your personal reputation with Dr. Chen was a significant factor in their decision." "I'm aware of that. Are you also aware that the consortium included specific provisions in their contract structure requiring continuity of key personnel?" Dr. Chen's team was concerned about exactly this type of situation. Companies winning contracts based on experienced staff and then replacing them with less qualified personnel after signing. I hadn't been aware of those provisions, but they made perfect sense given the complexity and duration of the implementation timeline. The Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal extended over 5 years with performance milestones tied to specific expertise and relationship management capabilities. "What kind of provisions?" "If Meridian makes significant personnel changes affecting account management without consortium approval, the contract includes termination clauses and penalty assessments." Dr. Chen specifically insisted on those protections after negative experiences with other contractors. The information transformed my understanding of Derek's situation completely. His appointment wasn't just problematic from a relationship management perspective, it potentially violated contractual commitments that could void the entire deal and expose Meridian to significant financial penalties. "James, I appreciate that information. It provides important context for understanding the current situation." "Elena, I have to ask, would you be interested in discussing opportunities with Quantum? We've been expanding our government contracts division, and someone with your track record and relationship network would be incredibly valuable." The offer represented an intriguing possibility I hadn't considered. Quantum defense systems had the technical capabilities and financial resources to compete for large-scale government contracts, but they'd struggled to develop the relationship-based partnerships that distinguish successful firms from technical service providers. I'd be open to preliminary discussions, but I should mention that Meridian required signing non-compete agreements as part of my severance package. I haven't signed those documents yet, and I have 48 hours remaining to make that decision. That's interesting timing. If you decide not to sign the non-compete, you'd be free to pursue other opportunities immediately, and if Dr. Chen's consortium terminates their Meridian contract due to personnel changes, that would create an immediate opportunity for alternative partnerships. The conversation with James revealed possibilities I hadn't fully considered. My phone call to Dr. Chen had been motivated by professional obligation and personal integrity, but it had also initiated a process that could lead to much broader consequences than simply exposing Derek's inexperience. If the Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Consortium terminated their contract with Meridian, they would need alternative partners capable of providing the cybersecurity solutions they required. Quantum defense systems had the technical capabilities but lacked the relationship foundation that made the partnership successful. However, if I joined Quantum and brought my relationship network with me, that gap could be eliminated quickly. The following morning brought confirmation that events were unfolding exactly as I'd anticipated. Dr. Chen called me directly, her voice carrying the controlled frustration of someone who'd discovered they'd been deceived. "Elena, we conducted the briefing with Derek Castellano yesterday afternoon. I think you should know that it didn't go well." "What happened?" He couldn't answer basic questions about our technical requirements, demonstrated no understanding of the regulatory environment across different states, and admitted he'd never managed a government cybersecurity contract before. When we asked about his experience with critical infrastructure protection, he referenced marketing campaigns he'd developed for Tech Fortress rather than actual implementation projects. Derek's performance had been even worse than I'd expected. Rather than acknowledging his limitations and outlining plans for acquiring necessary expertise, he'd apparently tried to substitute irrelevant experience for actual qualifications. Our technical team was particularly concerned about his lack of understanding regarding integration with legacy systems and compliance with federal security standards. These aren't areas where on-the-job learning is acceptable. Mistakes could compromise power grid security for millions of people. What does this mean for your contract with Meridian? We're invoking the personnel continuity clauses in our agreement. Meridian has 72 hours to either restore the original account management team or face contract termination and penalty assessments. We've already notified Richard Blackwood about our position. The timeline was perfect. Dr. Chen's ultimatum would expire exactly when my 72-hour window for signing Meridian's severance agreement ended. If I declined their offer and remained free to pursue other opportunities, I could potentially help Dr. Chen's consortium transition to a new partner while avoiding any legal complications with non-compete restrictions. "Sarah, if Meridian can't meet your requirements, what are your alternative options?" "We've already initiated preliminary discussions with Quantum Defense Systems about emergency partnership arrangements. They have the technical capabilities we need, and their government contracts division has a strong reputation for reliable implementation." "That's a wise contingency plan." "Elena, I need to ask you something directly. If Quantum becomes our primary partner, would you consider joining their team as our relationship manager? Your understanding of our requirements and stakeholder dynamics would ensure continuity despite the vendor change. The offer represented the perfect convergence of professional opportunity and personal vindication. Instead of simply exposing Derek's incompetence, I could actually step into a position where I'd manage the same project for a more capable organization while Meridian faced the consequences of prioritizing nepotism over competence. "Sarah, I'd need to understand the specifics of any offer, but I'm definitely interested in continuing our professional relationship regardless of corporate affiliations. I'll coordinate with James Mitchell at Quantum about structuring an appropriate proposal. This situation is unfortunate, but it may actually result in a stronger partnership with an organization that prioritizes expertise over family connections." After ending the call, I looked at the unsigned severance documents on my desk. In less than 24 hours, I would need to choose between financial security with restrictions or professional freedom with uncertainty. But thanks to Derek Castellano's spectacular failure and Dr. Chen's principled response, that uncertainty was rapidly becoming a clearly defined opportunity. The $1.3 billion pipeline that Richard Blackwood thought he could hand to his son-in-law was about to vanish, taking Meridian's reputation and financial future with it. and I was positioning myself to catch it when it fell. The final 24 hours before my decision deadline unfolded with the precision of a carefully orchestrated demolition. Every phone call, every email, every desperate attempt by Meridian's leadership to salvage their collapsing situation only accelerated the process I'd set in motion with one truthful conversation. At 7:30 a.m. on Friday morning, Richard Blackwood called me personally. His voice carried none of the confident authority he'd displayed during our termination meeting 3 days earlier. Instead, I heard the strained desperation of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. "Elena, I think there may have been some miscommunications about the strategic partnership transition. Dr. Chen seems to have concerns about Derek's background that don't reflect his actual capabilities." The careful phrasing revealed Blackwood's attempt to reframe Derek's spectacular failure as a communication problem rather than a competence issue. But Dr. Chen's evaluation had been thorough and precise. Derek simply didn't possess the expertise required for managing complex government cybersecurity partnerships. "Richard, I'm no longer in a position to influence client perceptions or relationship dynamics. Those conversations need to happen between Derek and the Pacific Northwest infrastructure team." "That's exactly the problem. Dr. Chen is refusing to work with Derek and demanding either your reinstatement or contract termination. She's claiming that replacing you violates personnel continuity provisions in our agreement." His admission confirmed that Meridian's legal team had reviewed the contract language and discovered the same clauses James Mitchell had mentioned. The Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Consortium hadn't simply negotiated favorable pricing, they'd included specific protections against exactly the kind of personnel manipulation Blackwood had attempted. "What does your legal counsel recommend? They're saying we have limited options. Either we restore the original account management structure, or we face contract termination plus penalty assessments that could exceed our total project profit margins." The financial implications were devastating. Meridian had probably projected the Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal would generate substantial profits over 5 years while establishing their reputation for handling large-scale government contracts. Now they faced the possibility of losing not just those future revenues, but paying penalties that would eliminate profits from other projects as well. "Have you discussed these options with Derek?" Blackwood's pause suggested that conversation hadn't gone well either. Derek is reconsidering his career priorities. He's concerned that the strategic partnerships role might not align with his professional interests. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what had actually happened. Derek had discovered that his new position required expertise he didn't possess, knowledge he couldn't quickly acquire, and responsibilities he wasn't prepared to handle. Rather than acknowledge his limitations publicly, he was probably seeking a face-saving exit from an impossible situation. "Richard, I appreciate you keeping me informed about these developments, but I'm not sure how I can help address them. Actually, there might be a way to resolve this situation that benefits everyone involved. What if we structured a consulting arrangement where you could continue managing the Pacific Northwest relationship while Derek handles other strategic partnership accounts? You'd maintain client continuity, and we'd preserve the contract." The proposal revealed how completely Blackwood misunderstood the situation. Dr. Chen's ultimatum wasn't about finding creative workarounds, it was about trust, competence, and contractual compliance. Offering me a consulting role while keeping Derek in his position would satisfy none of the consortium's concerns. "That's an interesting idea, but I think you should focus on discussing options directly with Dr. Chen's team. They're the decision-makers in this situation." After ending the call, I reflected on how quickly Meridian's leadership had moved from confident restructuring to desperate damage control. 3 days earlier, Blackwood had presented Derek's appointment as a strategic improvement that would bring fresh perspectives to our client relationships. Now he was acknowledging that the change threatened their largest contract, and seeking ways to undo decisions he'd described as final. Later that morning, James Mitchell called with an update that demonstrated how rapidly the cybersecurity industry could pivot when new opportunities emerged. "Elena, I've been authorized to make you a formal offer. Quantum wants you to join our Government Contracts Division as Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, with immediate responsibility for managing the Pacific Northwest infrastructure account, if Dr. Chen's consortium terminates their Meridian contract." The timing was remarkable. James had moved from preliminary discussions to formal job offers within 48 hours, suggesting that Quantum's leadership understood both the immediate opportunity and the strategic value of securing my services before other competitors recognized the situation. "What would the position involve?" You'd essentially rebuild the Pacific Northwest relationship under Quantum's technical framework. Dr. Chen's team trusts your judgment and appreciates your expertise, so the transition would focus on demonstrating our technical capabilities rather than establishing new personal relationships. The role represented everything I'd built at Meridian, but with the resources and support of a much larger organization. Quantum Defense Systems had government contracts worth billions of dollars, technical teams with specialized expertise, and financial stability that would support long-term strategic partnerships. James, before I can consider any offers, I need to resolve my current situation with Meridian. I have until this afternoon to decide whether to sign their severance agreement, which includes non-compete restrictions. Understood, but I should mention that if you decide not to sign those restrictions, we'd want to move quickly. Dr. Chen's 72-hour ultimatum expires Monday morning, and we'd need time to prepare transition materials and technical demonstrations. The convergence of timelines created perfect leverage for making decisions that would benefit both my career and Dr. Chen's consortium. If I declined Meridian's severance offer by the afternoon deadline, I'd be free to accept Quantum's position immediately. If Dr. Chen terminated Meridian's contract Monday morning, Quantum could step in as the replacement partner without any delays. That afternoon brought the most satisfying phone call of the entire week. Derek Castellano contacted me one final time, but his tone had shifted from strained confidence to complete defeat. Elena, I want you to know that I never intended for this situation to develop the way it has. I thought the strategic partnerships role would involve different responsibilities than what I've encountered. His admission revealed that Derek had been as deceived about the position's requirements as I'd been about the reasons for my termination. Someone, probably Richard Blackwood, had convinced him that managing strategic partnerships meant coordinating technical implementations rather than building and maintaining complex professional relationships. Derek, I don't hold you personally responsible for decisions you didn't make, but I do think you've discovered that this role requires specific experience and expertise that can't be easily substituted. That's exactly what I've learned. Dr. Chen's team expects detailed knowledge about regulatory compliance, threat assessment methodologies, and stakeholder management across multiple jurisdictions. I have marketing experience and business development skills, but nothing that applies to these requirements. His honest assessment of the situation demonstrated more self-awareness than I'd expected. Derek had been placed in an impossible position, but rather than blaming others or making excuses, he was acknowledging the fundamental mismatch between his capabilities and the job's demands. What are you planning to do? I'm going to submit my resignation this afternoon and return to business development work where my skills are actually relevant. This experience has taught me that accepting positions outside my expertise area is unfair to both clients and colleagues. Derek's resignation would eliminate Meridian's last hope for resolving the Pacific Northwest infrastructure crisis. Without qualified personnel to manage the account, they couldn't meet Dr. Chen's ultimatum or satisfy the contractual requirements for maintaining the partnership. Derek, I respect your decision to be honest about the situation. That takes integrity, especially when admitting mistakes could be professionally embarrassing. Thank you. I also want you to know that I'll be recommending to Richard Blackwood that he offer you whatever it takes to return and manage this account properly. The Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal is too important to lose because of poor personnel decisions. After ending that call, I walked to my kitchen table where Meridian's severance documents had remained unsigned for 3 days. The generous financial offer, 6 months' salary plus extended benefits, represented significant compensation for someone facing unexpected unemployment. But accepting it would also mean agreeing to non-compete restrictions that would prevent me from pursuing the quantum opportunity. The choice had become clear through the week's developments. Meridian's leadership had prioritized family connections over professional competence, deceived clients about personnel qualifications, and jeopardized their largest contract through poor judgment. They deserved the consequences of those decisions, and I deserved the opportunity to continue my career with an organization that valued expertise over nepotism. I picked up the documents, carried them to my home office, and fed them through my paper shredder without signing anything. Within minutes, I called James Mitchell to accept Quantum's offer, effective immediately. Then I called Dr. Chen to inform her that I would be available to continue managing the Pacific Northwest infrastructure account under new organizational auspices if she decided to terminate Meridian's contract. Finally, I composed a brief email to Richard Blackwood. After careful consideration, I've decided not to accept your severance offer. I wish Meridian success in resolving its current challenges." The email was professional, concise, and devastatingly final. By declining their severance terms, I'd retained complete freedom to compete against Meridian while they faced the loss of their largest client and the expertise needed to prevent that loss. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of a natural disaster that everyone could see approaching but no one could prevent. Dr. Chen's ultimatum expired at 9 a.m. Central Time, and Richard Blackwood had no qualified personnel to offer as alternatives to Derek Castellano. At 9:15 a.m., I received a copy of the termination notice that Dr. Chen sent to Meridian's leadership. The language was formal, precise, and absolutely devastating. Due to Meridian Technologies' failure to maintain qualified personnel for account management in accordance with Section 12.3 of our partnership agreement, the Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Consortium hereby terminates contract PNI 2025-001, effective immediately. Penalty assessments as outlined in Section 18.7 will be calculated and invoiced separately. The $1.3 billion pipeline that had taken 3 years to develop and represented Meridian's future growth strategy vanished with a single email. Everything Richard Blackwood had gambled on his son-in-law's ability to learn quickly and adapt to complex responsibilities had been lost. But for me, Monday morning represented a new beginning. I was starting work at Quantum Defense Systems as Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, with immediate responsibility for helping Dr. Chen's consortium transition to a new technical partner that could provide both expertise and reliability. The relationship I'd built over 3 years remained intact. The project I'd developed would continue under better organizational leadership, and the career that had been eliminated through nepotism and poor judgment was continuing at a higher level with greater resources and support. Richard Blackwood had thought he could replace experience with family connections. Derek Castellano had thought he could substitute enthusiasm for expertise. Both had discovered that in the world of government cybersecurity partnerships, trust and competence couldn't be easily counterfeited or quickly acquired. One phone call had started the process that brought their empire down, but it was their own decisions, their own deceptions, and their own limitations that ensured its complete collapse. 6 months later, I stood in Quantum Defense Systems' Seattle office, overlooking Elliott Bay as Dr. Sarah Chen and I reviewed the first quarterly implementation report for the Pacific Northwest Infrastructure Cybersecurity Initiative. The project that had once represented Meridian's future was now exceeding all performance benchmarks under our management. The integration with Oregon's coastal wind farms is ahead of schedule, Dr. Chen noted, scrolling through technical metrics on her tablet. Your team's approach to legacy system compatibility has solved problems we didn't even know we had. The success wasn't accidental. Quantum's resources had allowed us to assign specialized technical teams to each state's unique infrastructure challenges. Where Meridian would have stretched their capabilities across 6 different regulatory environments, we had dedicated engineers who understood the specific requirements of hydroelectric systems in Washington, solar installations in Nevada, and geothermal operations in Northern California. My role had evolved beyond simple relationship management into genuine strategic partnership development. Instead of convincing clients to accept standardized solutions, I was coordinating truly customized approaches that addressed each jurisdiction's specific vulnerabilities and operational requirements. The California legislature is requesting a presentation about expanding coverage to additional municipal utilities, Dr. Chen continued. They're impressed with the threat detection improvements we've achieved in the pilot programs. The expansion opportunities represented exactly what I'd envisioned when building the original Pacific Northwest relationship. Success with critical infrastructure protection inevitably led to additional contracts as word spread through government networks about effective cybersecurity implementations, but the professional satisfaction paled in comparison to what had happened to Meridian Technologies in the months following my departure. The penalty assessments from the terminated Pacific Northwest contract had been severe enough to trigger a comprehensive financial review by their board of directors. The investigation revealed that Derek's appointment hadn't been an isolated incident. Richard Blackwood had been systematically placing family members and personal connections in positions requiring specialized expertise they didn't possess. Marcus Rivera, who'd remained in contact despite his transfer to the finance department, had kept me informed about the internal chaos that followed Dr. Chen's contract termination. The board discovered that Blackwood's daughter Isabella, Derek's wife, had been appointed to head the marketing department despite having no previous experience in cybersecurity or B2B communications. They brought in an external consulting firm to audit personnel qualifications across all departments. Marcus had told me during one of our coffee meetings. Turns out nearly 30% of management positions were filled by people with family or personal connections to Richard, rather than relevant professional experience. The revelations had destroyed investor confidence and triggered a series of client defections as other government agencies reconsidered their partnerships with Meridian. The Nevada Department of Transportation canceled a pending contract renewal. The Portland Municipal Authority declined to extend their cybersecurity services agreement. The Arizona State University project was terminated for convenience when university administrators learned about the personnel practices that had affected the Pacific Northwest deal. Within 4 months, Meridian had lost over 60% of their government contracts and faced a federal investigation into their hiring practices for positions involving national security clearances. Companies receiving government cybersecurity contracts were required to maintain qualified personnel with appropriate background checks and security clearances, something that became complicated when those positions were filled based on family relationships rather than professional credentials. The investigation revealed that Derek's security clearance application had contained several inaccuracies about his previous experience and technical qualifications. While the errors might have been inadvertent, they raised questions about Meridian's internal review processes and commitment to federal security requirements. The FBI spent 3 weeks in our offices reviewing personnel files and security protocols, Marcus had explained. They were particularly interested in how Richard made hiring decisions for positions requiring clearances. Apparently, nepotism becomes a national security concern when family members have access to critical infrastructure protection plans. The federal scrutiny had been the final blow to Meridian's reputation within the government cybersecurity market. Even clients who might have overlooked personnel irregularities couldn't ignore potential security risks or regulatory compliance problems. By month 6, Richard Blackwood had been forced to step down as CEO following a vote of no confidence from the board of directors. Derek and Isabella had quietly left the company, reportedly moving back to Boston, where Derek returned to marketing work with a firm that handled consumer products rather than government contracts. The company I'd spent 7 years building had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing personal relationships over professional competence in industries where expertise literally protected national security. But the story's most satisfying element wasn't Meridian's collapse, it was the opportunities that had emerged from their failure. Dr. Chen's consortium had been so impressed with our implementation success that they'd recommended Quantum for similar projects across the western United States. We were now managing cybersecurity initiatives for power grids in Colorado, renewable energy installations in Arizona, and water treatment facilities in Utah. Each new contract reinforced the strategic advantages of relationship-based partnerships while demonstrating the technical capabilities that set Quantum apart from competitors. My network of contacts throughout state and federal agencies had become invaluable for identifying emerging opportunities and understanding evolving security requirements. James Mitchell had been promoted to Vice President of Government Relations, partly based on the success of recruiting me and capturing the Pacific Northwest infrastructure account. Our partnership had proven that experienced personnel could transition between organizations while maintaining client relationships, provided the receiving company offered genuine technical excellence and organizational support. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Dr. Chen said, setting down her tablet and looking directly at me. "The Department of Homeland Security has approached our consortium about developing a pilot program for protecting critical infrastructure against emerging threats from artificial intelligence and quantum computing." The opportunity represented exactly the kind of forward-thinking initiative that attracted the most talented cybersecurity professionals and generated the highest value contracts. But it also required expertise and relationship management capabilities that few companies could provide. They're looking for a primary contractor who can coordinate technical solutions across multiple agencies while maintaining the kind of trust relationships that make complex implementations successful. Your background and our consortium's experience with large-scale coordination make us the obvious choice. The project Dr. Chen described would dwarf even the Pacific Northwest infrastructure deal in scope and complexity. Protecting national critical infrastructure against AI and quantum computing threats would require coordination between federal agencies, state governments, private utilities, and technology companies across the entire country. "I'd be very interested in exploring that opportunity," I replied. "Quantum has the technical resources and federal contracting experience to support that kind of initiative." As our meeting concluded, and I prepared to return to Austin for coordination meetings with our technical teams, I reflected on how completely my professional circumstances had changed in 6 months. The termination that had seemed like career devastation had actually eliminated limitations I hadn't recognized. Meridian's resources, while adequate for regional contracts, couldn't have supported the kind of national-scale initiatives that Quantum handled routinely. Their approach to relationship management, while successful within certain parameters, lacked the sophistication required for complex multi-agency coordination. My decision to reject their severance offer and pursue opportunities with organizations that valued expertise over personal connections had led to professional advancement that wouldn't have been possible within Meridian's structure. But perhaps the most important lesson from the entire experience was the power of maintaining professional integrity even when facing personal betrayal. The phone call to Dr. Wickham Prors that had started Meridian's collapse hadn't been motivated by revenge. It had been driven by responsibility to protect a client's interests and maintain honest professional relationships. That integrity had been recognized and rewarded by people who understood the difference between genuine expertise and superficial credentials. Dr. Chen's trust, James Mitchell's confidence, and Quantum's investment in my capabilities had created opportunities that far exceeded anything I'd lost when Meridian prioritized nepotism over competence. Richard Blackwood had thought he could replace experience with family connections and substitute enthusiasm for expertise. His son-in-law had been placed in a position requiring knowledge and relationships that couldn't be quickly acquired or easily faked. Both had learned that in industries where mistakes carry serious consequences, trust and competence aren't just professional advantages, they're essential requirements that can't be counterfeited through personal relationships or organizational politics. The $1.3 billion pipeline they'd thought they could control had vanished, not because of revenge or sabotage, but because they'd failed to understand the fundamental requirements for managing strategic partnerships in government cybersecurity. One phone call had exposed their deception, but it was their own decisions, their own limitations, and their own unwillingness to prioritize competence over convenience that had brought their empire down. And for me, that collapse had cleared the way for opportunities I'd never imagined possible. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.